Spotlight screening of Suppressed and Sabotaged: The Fight to Vote. My name is Carmen Samuel, and I'm the screenings program manager here at Brave New Films. Brave New Films is a nonprofit film company founded by Robert Greenwald with a mission to create media that makes an impact. We are here to educate and empower viewers to take action on issues that matter the most. Brave New Films is hosting spotlight screenings for a deeper dive that centers specific states with new voting laws enacted in the past 2 years. Today's spotlight is on Georgia. And following the film, we'll be talking with leaders from some of Georgia's most influential voting rights advocacy groups. And today, we have Tangi Bush, who is the Legal Affairs Director at New Georgia Project, David Garcia, who is the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at Galileo Latino Community Development Fund and Galileo Impact Fund Incorporated. And finally, we have Wanda Mosley, who is the National Field Director at Black Voters Matter Fund. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our award-winning producer, director, filmmaker, and Brave New Films founder, Robert Greenwald.
Thank, thank you, Carmen, and welcome to all the panelists who I strongly encourage you to make sure you stick around after the film. They're people who are doing absolutely critical, important work of the most affirming kind and work that says, yes, we are a democracy, and yes, we have to continue to fight. And these folks are helping lead the fight for all of us. Brave New Film's work around voting suppression began in Georgia. What happened was that right after Stacey Abrams' campaign and her speech acknowledging that she was not going to be governor, but it was not a concession speech. And she talked about, and many people talked about, voting suppression. And we thought, well, let's see if we could do a short video. Maybe we could get 2 or 3 people to talk about their experience. So the women and the men at Brave New Films, who are an extraordinarily talented, smart, and committed group, began to reach out, and they talked to friends and allies from the groups in Georgia. And the stories we heard, I literally had the experience that I wasn't living in the United States. This was some other country where these stories were coming in, and not 1 or 2 or 3, but multiple stories. And so what began with the idea of maybe we would do a 5-minute piece grew and grew and grew, because here were true patriots. Here were people insisting that they have the right to vote. And here were people saying what many of us who were working on this were feeling. How is this possible that so many years after Reconstruction, so many years after the Civil Rights Movement, so many years after people gave body and limb and life, people were killed over the right to vote? How is it possible that this disgusting example of racism run wild was continuing, building, and stopping people from voting? Well, that began all of our work at Brave New Films about the fact that we were going to do everything we could to help tell the story. What we do at Brave New Films is we put a face on policy. And so we were committed to do that. And we found multiple people, you'll see them in the film, from Georgia, telling about their experiences, telling about how they were deprived. And unfortunately, over the years, the organized suppression, which now includes sabotage, has gotten greater and greater, more and more efforts in more and more states stop people from voting. And what the film is, it's a tool. It's a tool for every single one of you watching, and it's free. You can screen it in your home for your friends, for your relatives. You can screen it at work. You can screen it at church. You can screen it at school. Last time around, we had 2,020 screenings, all free. before the 2020 election, and we hope to have several thousand screenings this time. But it'll only happen with help and support and effort from every one of you. It is truly an accurate statement that it takes a village. It takes a village to create a democracy. It takes a village to fight for a democracy. And it takes a village to say no. No, we will not be silent. We're going to take action. We will not let this racist behavior and these laws stand. So I'm going to turn it back over now to Carmen to thank all of you who are watching today. And I hope that we'll be able to see and share the stories of how you're using the film and what every single person is doing to help stop this attack on democracy and the principles of democracy. Thank you. And Carmen, back to you.
In fact, our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Voter suppression and race is as intertwined as anything in our country. The fight that Black people have had to be full citizens in this country, to have a voice and a vote.
We've seen this over the history of our country. People of color, Black people have had to fight for their vote. You think about this experiment in self-government. One person, one vote. But we've always had to fight for it. Here we are again, fighting for what's basic.
We're now in a major election year with the 2022 midterms this fall. But before voters head to the polls, state legislatures may be changing how you vote.
Driven by the big lie, driven by Donald Trump's claims of a stolen election, we see states across the country passing laws that make it harder for some people to vote.
This is the #1 continuing threat to American democracy.
If you want to understand how voter suppression can actually impact the outcome of the election, just go back to 2018 in Georgia in the governor's race between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams.
Georgia's tight race for governor is getting national attention.
Brian Kemp is not only the Republican gubernatorial nominee, he's Georgia's Secretary of State.
Stacey Abrams looking to make history by becoming the nation's first female African-American governor.
Volunteers are picking up phones and knocking on doors across the state.
Come in and register to vote.
We are very excited to register as many people as we possibly can.
What do we want?
Register to vote!
When do we want it?
Today!
I come as one, but I stand as 10,000.
Pull back that veneer. And you see something really rotten happening. It's almost like termites coming in. They're in the wood. They're eating the wood away. And you don't even realize your house is getting ready to collapse until it's almost too late. We've got to understand, this isn't a Klan cross burning. This stuff is very bureaucratic, it's very mundane, it's very routine, but it is lethal.
My name is Bobby Jenkins. I live in Cuthbert, Georgia. The county is Randolph County. I spent about almost 35 years in education. I'm a superintendent of schools.
My name is Loretta Brown. I live in Morgan, Georgia, and I grew up in Randolph County. I am the state advisor for the Georgia NAACP Youth and College Division.
My name is Lewis Brooks. I live in Thomaston, Georgia, Upson County. And I've been living here my whole 89 years, except the 2 years I spent in service in Korea. In I believe it was 55 or 56, that's when they started to letting black people vote in Upson County. When I went to register to vote, it was tough. They asked me all kind of questions to try to keep me from registering. I passed the test. Once I got my voter right, I decided I wasn't going to let anything stop me from voting. Because I used to walk. You go up the street here, across the next street over there, I walk over there and walk back and vote. And I didn't miss a voting, except when they closed the poll. I'm a citizen. It's my right to vote and speak my opinion.
I saw this ad saying that there was a proposal to close 7 of the 9 precincts in Randolph County. I said, what?
Then they put it in the papers that they was closing polls, costing them too much money.
First of all, Randolph is a poor county. Just to give you an example of what it would mean, there's a community benevolence a little north of town. Had that precinct been closed, some of those individuals would have to go 30 miles round trip in order to vote. It would have been a terrible hardship on our poor, on our elderly, and on those who are least able to afford transportation.
No, I got disabled and I couldn't do no driving. I know I couldn't afford to go that far to vote. This was on a black neighborhood. It made me feel like they would close it down to keep the black people from voting, because most black people vote Democrat. They only closed one white voting place. Everybody from out here in the black side had to go clean over there to the white section to vote. We're human, and we have our rights to vote just like anybody else.
Voters in Randolph County, Georgia are outraged.
Randolph County residents expressed their concerns with the Board of Elections.
Our citizens turned out in full force.
Big problem there.
They were behind us 100%, trying to keep those polling places open.
Convenience of the voter. You all are not considering that at all.
There's no disenfranchisement for the African Americans.
I went to the meeting, find out that they were trying to close 7 of the precincts.
You've got to stand up. You cannot allow this to continue.
They gave a couple of reasons, saying it would save money. The other one was that several of the polling places were not ADA compliant. The thing that was so ironic is we voted that way in May. You know, they weren't any worse in November than they were in May.
It will be impossible for rural voters without vehicles to vote on Election Day. It will be impossible for them. They will have to walk 3.5 hours just to get from one of these polling places to Cuthbert and Showman.
We did petition to keep it open. Pressure from the residents, civil rights organization, speaking up, speaking out.
They called the meeting to order, and they only had one motion. They voted to keep them open.
The news of what was happening here in Randolph County went worldwide.
The incident that we experienced threw the spotlight on everything else that had been going on. You know, we find out that in the state of Georgia, there were over 200 other polling places had been closed.
If you move a poll 4 miles, it is the equivalent of a 20% drop in black voter turnout. That's what shutting down these polls mean.
With 2 months to go, the race is heating up in Georgia.
Stacey Abrams' campaign feel they have the momentum behind them, and many of the polls we've seen so far support that.
You know, the Democrats are working hard, registering all these minority voters. If they can do that, they can win these elections in November.
There's no law in Georgia that requires the Secretary of State to process voter registration forms on a particular timeline.
Kemp withheld putting the names of thousands on the voter registration list until after the election.
80% were African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans.
This is Fulton County. Linda Marshall is my name. Most of my professional career has been in public service of one kind or another, as a teacher, as a government worker. I moved here in August of this year, but because of my emphasis on always being registered and always having the ability to vote, I did that almost immediately when I got here. Of course, I also knew the importance of the upcoming election, and I wanted to be a part of that history. It got closer and closer and closer to the election, and I was getting a little bit concerned, so I called the Secretary of State's office. My name is not on the roll. They can't tell me where it is. So all of that paperwork that I sent in, I don't know where it is. I'm 65, and for the first time, I did not get a chance to vote in a very close election of historic importance and proportion. Welcome to Georgia.
The midterm election in Georgia is only 29 days away.
Civil rights leaders say Kemp is illegally removing people from Georgia's voters list.
Republican Brian Kemp has already gotten the backing of our current president.
Thousands are purged from Georgia's voting rolls.
Purged from Georgia's voting rolls. 890,000 had no idea they could vote.
Battle is brewing over who's been removed from voting.
There has been instance after instance of unlawful voter purging. States are removing voters, many of whom have actually been found to have been eligible but were unlawfully removed from the rolls.
I received the purge notice. So I open it up and I read the first sentence. I, along with 380,000 Georgians, received the same notice.
That's an especially pernicious way to prevent people from voting, because once you register to vote, you would think that you should be able to remain on the rolls. And once you're removed from the rolls, you cannot vote.
I went out and got the mail, and there were 2 letters in there. They looked official. You're hereby notified that the City of Thunderbolt has challenged your right to vote. The City of Thunderbolt states that you no longer reside within the municipality. My license is valid, my address is valid, I own this home. Why are you questioning my right to vote?
You know, the purges, they've been going on for decades, maybe over a century in this state.
If you haven't voted in the last few elections, they'll purge you as if you must not be in the state anymore. If you move within the same county, they'll purge you, assuming you're not living in Georgia anymore. If you don't return a postcard from the Secretary of State, they'll purge you, because to them it means you're not a resident at this address. All of these tactics specifically and disproportionately target people of color, poor people, the elderly, all of whom tend to vote for Democrats.
Brian Kemp is notorious for erasing the polls and purging people right before the election deadline.
You have a candidate at the top of the ticket who is responsible for maintaining the integrity of the election.
He needed to have his hands on the levers.
You have an umpire who is also playing in the game.
Less than 20 days away from the midterms now.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
Literally is a dead heat.
This governor's race is already one for the history books, but it's also seeing record numbers of requests for absentee ballots, especially from African-American voters.
At a time where we're seeing roughly almost half of the people who've turned in an absentee ballot are people of color, that's a really, really good sign for Stacey Abrams.
We caught them off guard by running such a large-scale program and mailed 1.6 million African Americans an absentee ballot application.
In this midterm election, the absentee ballot requests are even outperforming presidential years. So that is startling and eye-popping and something that we need to dig in on to see what's going on there.
My name is Norman Broderick. I'm in Powder Springs, Georgia, Cobb County. I did 24 years in the military, deployed to Iraq twice, Bosnia, Saudi Arabia. I voted absentee before when I was deployed. When I was in Iraq the first time, I voted absentee, and when I was in Iraq the second time, I voted absentee. The absentee ballot is a very important tool that exists to allow people, not only just the military, but anybody who happens to be away from their voting station, to be able to cast their vote.
My name is Peggy Shu. I'm from Johns Creek, Georgia. I left Georgia for DC in the beginning of October, and before I left, I mailed out my absentee ballot application so that our registrar would send an absentee ballot to my new DC address.
I work at a U.S. Army Central, which is located at Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina. I'm away from home during the week. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get back to Georgia to vote. I could only do this absentee. I filled out everything I was supposed to fill out. I sent their documents in. I got confirmation that it was received. And to my surprise, I did not receive my absentee ballot.
I checked my mailbox every day. It was like nearing the end of the month. And so I started calling the voter protection hotline. I called my registrar. I sent emails, and it was really getting close to the election date. And I never received my ballot. The election day came and went, and I wasn't able to vote in the end.
When I contacted my wife and asked her about it, I think it was a couple of days before the election, it came here. And I tried contacting the Georgia Elections Board. I was told they did receive my absentee ballot request. Everything was filled out correctly, but that they mailed it to the wrong address. And she admitted that yes, they did mess up. It was their fault. But there was nothing I could do about it. It's too late. It's over with, and my vote will not be counted during this election.
It was probably one of the most frustrating things I've ever experienced. After having spent, my entire college career very invested in the political process, it was, I don't know, like a punch to the gut.
It still pisses me off to this day. Being in Baghdad, voting absentee was easier than being 4 hours away trying to vote absentee in South Carolina.
I took to Facebook, and like the millennial activist that I am, I recounted my experience in a Facebook post. I wrote, "This is what happened. I wasn't able to vote, and if you had a similar experience, let me know." And my friend from high school, she reached out to me and she said, "I also had struggles trying to get my ballot in, voting absentee."
So I submitted an absentee ballot. It came 2 days right before Election Day.
Over the course of 48 hours, we had 40 people. So many people in our immediate Facebook circle knew somebody who had a similar experience to us.
People have requested it like far in advance. Some people just didn't get their vote in.
That was when we really realized that this was not an isolated incident. It was a much bigger issue and a much more deeper rooted sort of phenomenon that was going on statewide.
I did speak with the Board of Elections, and he just dismissed it as like a hiccup. And he's like, "Oh, like, no, you don't really know what you're talking about." 40 cases not really a hiccup. It's more of like a wake-up call.
Today, we've worked to get answers about the claim that thousands of voters never got the absentee ballots they requested.
The race between Abrams and Kemp is literally neck and neck.
Their fate is now in the hands of voters.
The day is finally upon us.
The midterm elections are happening.
Voters head to the polls in one of the most intensely fought midterm elections. The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
I live in the South. I'm always worried about Election Day.
Have a great morning and go vote.
Oh yeah, gotta go vote today.
Voting started here in Georgia this morning, and if you think hitting the polls early will keep you from getting stuck on long lines, think again.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
I've never seen one.
The line hasn't moved in over an hour.
I really thought I was going to be able to run in and run out like I usually do.
The first thing I saw was just people everywhere. So we stood there for a while without moving. And then we would inch up. And then we wouldn't move. We had a lot of people with children there, pregnant mothers, elderly people. Some people have medical issues.
I took my son to school that morning, and then I went to vote at Ferguson Elementary, where I vote every election. The line just keeps getting longer. The line was so long, through the school and wrapped around the building. The lines was crazy everywhere, all over the county. It was real long. I was in line for 2 hours. I got to the door, that's when they was checking your ID before you go in, and she couldn't find my name. She directed me to go downtown Gwinnett, and I was like, I'm not gonna vote. And it was this older lady, she came over and she like held my hand and was like, please go do it. We need this. And I looked in her eyes and said, I will.
About 8 or 9, we started getting the calls about the long lines.
Long lines at the polling stations lead to low voter turnout. The research is just crystal clear on that.
Everyone in the world knew we were going to vote today. And in my neighborhood, there are no power cords. All these dedicated people waiting to vote. This is what we call voter suppression.
People were like upset and angry. I started calling the Secretary of State's office. I was either hung up on, placed on hold. They want people to go home and not vote. I ain't going nowhere. I'm gonna be right here.
The reason they sent me from Ferguson to the downtown Gwinnett was for the provisional vote. So I drove 25 minutes, and then when I got there, it was crowded in there. I waited 45 minutes to find out that's not where I needed to be. She told me that this was the wrong place and that I can go back to Ferguson. I had to call back and redo my schedule. So now the voting not only cut on my time, cut on my money.
When we went in, filled out all the paperwork, had the ID, took it up to the lady. I had mine in my hand. One hand had hers in the other, because she's legally blind. So we go give it to the lady, and she goes to scan Barbara's ID.
Wow.
So she looked up at Barbara. She said, well, Miss Barbara, when was the last time you voted? My sister got strong. I've been voting since I was 18 years old, and I'm 82.
I was disappointed.
She was a little upset. My girl wanted to vote, and they were trying to keep her from voting.
Since I became a citizen, I have not missed an election. I showed up, and a very nice lady, she looked at my ID and said, no, you're not registered. And I said, no, wait a second. Here's my registration card, and showed them that I was registered. And they said, yeah, but your name is Del Rio with a space, but your voter ID says Del Rio one word, and therefore it doesn't match. In the voter registration, my name shows as Del Rio with a space. My ID is Del Rio, no space. That was a non-match. I said, this is not legal and I need to be allowed to vote. After much discussion, they said to me, this time we'll allow you to vote, but it's a little bit like they're doing me a favor. The right to vote should be something that we should make easier rather than more difficult.
Latinos and Asian Americans are 6 times more likely than white Georgians to be cut from the voter rolls because of exact match, and Black Americans are 8 times more likely to be cut because of exact match.
I have voted in every election, and all of a sudden I'm not there.
Controversy surrounds the state's exact match law that put the registrations of 53,000 voters, most of them African Americans, on hold because of discrepancies in the way their names are spelled in state databases.
People of color have names that are a little bit less typical, and that's where the errors are at their highest. Brian Kemp knows this.
A group of students will not have their voices heard at the polls, at least not in Georgia.
They're turning a bunch of students away over here.
We're showing up here and at the Booker T. Washington location, and their names were not on the actual roll.
The students was being turned away. I talked to over 50 students that morning.
First, they told me I was at the wrong polling station.
They said, you didn't get registered. I was like, what do you mean?
And there was only about 4 voting ballot booths.
They didn't process my registration didn't go through. I walked back to my dorm and said, I guess I just won't vote.
Just before I went to vote, I had been in an African American history class where we were actually talking about voter suppression, about what was it like for people that were going to vote. I filled out a little slip of paper, gave it to the poll workers. They looked up at me and they said, it's coming up in our system as though you're not a citizen of the United States. I just sort of looked at them like they had 2 heads. Like, I'm sorry, I was born in New York, what?
When I got to the front of the line, they informed me that I was registered to vote, but not in Dougherty County. They were telling me that I was registered back home in Warner Robins, where I was from, and I've never voted there. I've never even been registered there.
The thing was that I had brought proof that I was a U.S. citizen. I had with me my driver's license, my passport card, and my Emory student ID, but they would not look at the passport card whatsoever to prove that I was a citizen. I walked out crying. What I learned in history class just hours before, this happened to me in 2018.
I had been through and participated in voter registration drive on campus, within the community. It was just like, wow, after all of this, I'm not gonna be able to vote myself.
Like when I was growing up, voting was a thing. It was an event. So little me is trailing behind my parents watching them vote.
My parents would take me to the voting polls every time when I was little. I would go in and I would help them fill out the bubbles.
I get a chance to vote, and then you get there and the experience is just terrible, and you have to call your mom and be like, why is this so hard? You never told me it would be this hard.
This was huge for us because Stacey Abrams was actually a Spelman alum. History would have been made, and it would have been made by my Spelman sister.
If there is no one who gets to 50% tonight, Robin, there will be a runoff in December.
We'll find out as the day and evening goes on.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Are they letting you know? Are you really kidding me?
Old people who can't vote, there's young people who can't vote, there's people in every county who can't vote.
It just created this intense fog of confusion across the state.
Been here for 3 hours, 4 or 5 hour wait. 5 hours.
This is way, way too long for us to stay and vote.
How long have you waited in line here?
About 3.5 hours.
And have you decided you can't stand it? You can't take it anymore? Are you going to go home?
I'm hurting. I'll be back. I got to go take some medicine.
It was really good. The lines weren't too long and everyone was super helpful.
We don't hardly ever have to wait here. It's always a pleasant experience up here.
If you have a fixed resource, an easy way to suppress the vote is to just make that resource unavailable to the people who you don't want to vote. And that's exactly what happened in the 2018 election here in the state of Georgia. In places like North Fulton County, which are wealthy, there were more machines than anyone could ever use. In black neighborhoods, there were a quarter of the number of machines that were needed to service the population.
Lots of people left without voting.
It was people just dropping off when it became 2 hours, 3 hours. 4th hour is very heartbreaking.
All it takes is a little walking away at 159 counties, to influence an election. A little here, a little there, and then in a race like this, which was so close, there you go.
All night on Twitter, a trending topic, #StayInLine.
I had to go and pick my son up. He had to be picked up before 6. I picked my son up, and he went with me and sat in the car. And then I went back to Ferguson Elementary. And by this time, the evening crowd is there, and the line has tripled. And I was like, oh, there is no way. Just for my one vote, it took me like 6 hours. And I wanted to give up because I promised that elderly lady outside that I would do it.
5 hours, so about 5 hours took me to vote. It sucks the life out of you.
I'd been in people's homes, I'd been in their neighborhoods, I'd held their hands. And so to get to election night and to start hearing more and more stories of voter suppression, to hear more and more from people who were told that they couldn't vote or who were turned away or had to give up because of 4-hour lines, that broke my heart.
Republican Brian Kemp holds a narrow lead over Democrat Stacey Abrams.
Tens of thousands of ballots left to be counted in this election. They were counting provisional ballots for hours.
Provisional ballots are basically placebos. They're being given to voters to kind of shut them up, make them go away.
The next day, I was so excited because they were saying that it was a close race. I was like, oh, let me make sure that my vote count. So I called there, the number that was on the paper that I got from the voting poll. And she go, oh no, they counting every vote. You don't need to call. I called my mom to double check. My mom worked for the poll for 20-some years. And she said, no, that's not true. You call back to make sure the vote count. And someone else says to the phone, and I got the same thing. No, you don't need to call back. We counting all the votes.
We just started discovering so many people voting provisionally. We realized, oh, you voted provisionally, so you might have to come back here the next day and show your ID. Is that something you know? And they're like, no, I already voted. Like, I'm good.
But you have to come back within 3 days with the documentation to prove you are who you say you are. When you have a large working class population that has to punch a clock, that's really tough. You've lost pay from work trying to vote. That's a poll tax.
Hi, this is Christine from Gwinnett County Elections.
I wanted to confirm if my vote was counted or not.
All right, what is your last name?
Kimball.
Let's see. There was no participation.
So does that...
You weren't given credit for voting.
My vote was not counted.
It looks like it on election day, yes, ma'am.
No, I thank you. Goodbye.
Last night, my opponent ended her campaign. The election is over, and I'm honored to be Georgia's governor-elect.
I acknowledge that former Secretary of State Brian Kemp will be certified as the victor in the 2018 gubernatorial election. But to watch an elected official baldly pin his hopes for election on the suppression of the people's democratic right to vote has been appalling. This is not a speech of concession. Because concession means to acknowledge an action is right, true, or proper. As a woman of conscience and faith, I cannot concede that.
The voter suppression that we saw in Georgia for the 2018 election between Kemp and Abrams was really just a precursor to the voter suppression laws that we're now seeing across the country.
In 2021, there have been 19 states that have passed over 34 laws to restrict access to the ballot.
They're all based on the same big lie of voter fraud that Donald Trump has been pushing. The most notable ones are the swing states.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed new voting reform legislation into law. The law includes limits on drop boxes and changes to how people sign up for vote by mail.
I've been voting by mail since I moved to Florida. We don't all work 9-to-5 jobs, so it's really nice to be able to vote by mail. I missed out on a pivotal city council race last year because I did not realize that I had been removed from vote by mail and I did not get any notification. Unfortunately, I will have to re-enroll every cycle now after each election is over. Your average voter is not going to remember to re-enroll every single year. It makes me quite angry and supremely frustrated.
What it does is move the goalpost yet again in a long line or a game of voter suppression that has been taking place in Florida for so many years.
The Republican-backed election reform bill is headed to Governor Greg Abbott's desk. The bill bans 24-hour voting and drive-through voting.
I loved the drive-through voting experience. It was safe, it was secure, it was convenient, and very efficient. You vote from the comfort of your car. I drove others to cast their ballot, and for some, it was the very first time ever. And had it not been for drive-through voting, they probably would have never voted. After the 2020 election, the Texas legislature passed bills to ban drive-through voting. And that is what we're dealing with here in Texas. They want voting to be as difficult as possible, so you won't do it.
A major Supreme Court decision on voting rights. The conservative majority upholding 2 Arizona voting restrictions that opponents claim would unfairly result in racial discrimination.
One criminalizes the collection of ballots by third parties. The other requires election officials to throw out ballots cast at the wrong precinct.
I have about 300 family members. The Felix family is pretty large here in Yuma. For some of us who live down in the counties, that would be about anywhere from 30 to 100 miles away from the nearest polling place. Some of my family members are disabled. Some of them cannot drive miles away. Some, don't have access to, vehicles. My family has voted the last couple of years with people collecting ballots. Somebody goes to your door, collects your ballot, and collects them, ships them off to whatever polling location there is. With the new restrictions on collecting ballots, that is going to restrict almost hundreds of my family. It's silencing the votes of many, many rural Arizona people.
This morning, Georgia's governor has signed a controversial bill rewriting the state's election rules. It will limit absentee ballots in early voting, restrict ballot drop boxes, and impose new voter ID requirements.
The last couple of elections, I did mail-in voting as well as drop box voting. The new voting laws in Georgia restricting drop boxes, restricting mail-in voting is very repressive. I have multiple health issues, as do many other people. This would severely restrict my ability to vote. I don't know how long I can stand in line, to be honest, so I will be involved in efforts to challenge that.
If 2021 was the year of rampant voter suppression by Republican legislatures, 2022 is the year of voter subversion.
Election subversion actually tries to prevent the mechanics of elections happening.
And it could be anything from partisan poll watchers coming in and intimidating someone from their participation at the polls. And it could also be very much of identifying ideologues to start viewing those election officials.
Both Democrats and Republicans who defended the integrity of the 2020 election have been purged from their position. 163 Republicans who've amplified the big lie are running for statewide positions with authority over elections. This is akin to giving a robber a key to the bank.
I call it election sabotage, because really that is what these laws are designed for. They're designed to allow partisan officials to sabotage valid election results.
This insurrection has now taken root in our states. If the response to increased participation by communities of color, by young people, by women is to restrict their access and impede their participation, our democracy is not safe, it is not sound, and it is not resilient.
We are not going to let them take from us what our grandparents and parents fought and suffered and died to give us in the first place.
We had record turnout in the United States of America in 2020, and that tells me that people are awake. They understand what's happening. They're going to participate, and they're going to fight for their right to participate.
We're in the eye of the storm, and we need every single American to cut up with that same amount of energy that we did in 2018 and 2020.
Keep yourself educated about what's going on in your state with any voter suppression or election sabotage laws that have been passed. Educate your friends and family, your coworkers, your community. Make sure that everyone knows what's going on.
We have to put pressure on those that we've elected. It doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or Republican. We should be burning their phone lines up right now around voting rights.
Register people to vote. Register your friends, your family. Talk to everyone. Become the vote captain of your household.
Join a local organization in your community. Get involved locally.
Become a poll worker. Get trained.
If you don't like something, you can either volunteer or run for office.
We can't fight these issues alone. We have to be organized and we have to be engaged.
What's at stake is electing people who look like us. What's at stake is getting policy passed that will help protect us from these types of laws in the future.
Any voter suppression law is not just about black people, it is about America itself. On my mother's dying bed at 92 years old, former sharecropper, her last words were, "Do not let them take our votes away from us."
We've got to make democracy together.
From sea to shining sea.
They do not want this Black woman.
Welcome back to the screening. We are now joined by a panelist. We've got Tangi Bush, who is the Legal Affairs Director at New Georgia Project, David Garcia, Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at Galileo Latino Community Development Fund and Galileo Impact Fund Incorporated, and Wanda Mosley, who joins us from Black Voters Matter, and she is the National Field Director there. Now, before we get started, folks, we just want to have a few reminders, okay? So the resources were sent to RSVP, the head of the event. However, we've also dropped the link in the chat for your convenience. And also, we want to hear your thoughts. So please share your thoughts in the comment section, your voter-related questions in the chat, as at the end of the discussion, we'll be able to get to as many as possible. And then finally, folks, this film exists for you. So please share this film with friends, family, colleagues in Georgia. Everyone can get the film at www.fighttovote.org. So without further ado, let's hop into this panel discussion. Folks, so this film originally took place in 2018 in Georgia. So we would like to actually know what has changed in Georgia since the 2018 gubernatorial race.
Okay, am I starting on that one?
Yes, Wanda, please.
All right. Well, first of all, history since 2018 in the great state of Georgia. You know, it's interesting. Back in 2018, I oversaw our work here in Georgia before I took the role that I have now. And as I traveled throughout some of the other, 10, 11 states where we do work, I got a lot of sympathy from folks. Oh, Georgia, man, look at what they did, this, that. I was like, well, do not shed a tear for us in Georgia, because we are resilient. We are strong. We are fierce. We are determined. And we are brilliant organizers. And so it was a lot of fun to go back last year and say, see what I mean? Told you, don't shed any tears for us. So many things have changed since 2018. Yes, we have these ridiculous voter suppression. We have all of this confusion about, how it is that we now apply for the vote by mail ballot. Do we need to include a copy of our photo ID when we submit the application? Yes, if you don't have a Georgia driver's license, but that's ambiguous at best, because all the headlines said you need to do this, you have to have that. So it's intentionally confusing for folks. So many things have changed, but what hasn't changed is our ability to organize, mobilize our people, educate our people, and get our people to the polls. I think that one of the things that is lost in a discussion about voter suppression, especially in Georgia, is that election cycle after election cycle after election cycle, you see headline, record turnout, long lines, record turnout. And so why is that? Because voters in Georgia are not going to be denied their right as citizens, regardless of your voter suppression laws. So yes, we have seen a drop off on vote by mail ballots, and yet and still, we're still seeing record turnout. We saw record turnout in municipal elections last year. The ones that people usually stay home for. No, people came out and people voted because activists, voting rights, nonprofit organizations like all three that are represented here, we have been out engaging with our folks home January through October, and wait until November or October to come out and talk to folks. No, we have been engaged with phone calls, text message, social media to provide the information that our folks need to come out and vote, to better understand these new voter suppression rules. Yes, we've seen the headlines. No, we won't be giving out snacks and water. But that's okay, because figure out to get our folks what they need without breaking your crazy voter suppression laws. So a lot has changed in Georgia, but one thing that has not changed is the resilience and the determination of Georgia voters.
Thank you so much, Wanda. Does anyone else want to add to that?
No, I think you covered that one well.
Perfect, thank you. The next question we actually have for everyone is, can you explain what has happened with the election board in Georgia, and how will it impact voters this year?
I think I can answer that one. Under SB 202, the law that significantly changed election administration in Georgia, key issues in election management, including decisions on disqualifying ballots and voter eligibility, are made by county boards of election. SB 202 allows the state board of elections to determine that these county boards are, if these county boards are performing poorly, and they're able to replace the entire board with an administrator chosen at the state level. At the same time, the bill enhances the General Assembly's control over the state board. The bill also removes the Secretary of State from the role as both chair and voting member of the board. The new chair would be appointed by the legislature, which already appoints 2 members of the 5-person board, meaning that a full majority of the board would now be appointed by the Republican-dominated state legislature. To simplify, the state board, which will be controlled by the Republican legislative majority, is empowered to process the disqualifying of ballots across the state. SB 202 also gives state-level officials authority to usurp the powers of county election boards, again, allowing the Republican-dominated state government to potentially disqualify voters in Democratic-leaning areas. And when put together, it's clear that the bill is designed to create barriers to voting that are most likely to affect voters that don't have the time and resources to navigate them. In Georgia, as in most places, that's low-income and minority voters.
Thank you so much, David, for explaining that. Does anybody have anything else to add? Okay. So David mentioned Senate Bill 202. Can anybody answer a little bit more what exactly is Senate Bill 202, just for the lay folks in the audience? And what folks does it have on elections in Georgia this year?
Okay, I think I can at least start that answer because I think it's a very heavy answer. It's loaded with things. So SB 202 is known as the Election Integrity Act, but it's probably known more familiarly to us as the Voter Suppression Bill or Jim Crow 2.0. It depends on who you talk to, and I can expound on that. So it was a 90-plus page omnibus bill that was an immediate and direct response to a sky-high turnout by Black, brown, and young people. There's absolutely no reason to decry fraud when you have a sky-high turnout and you can't even back that up, right? So why would you suddenly need additional protection if every claim that has been made in a court of law in the state of Georgia has been met and shown to be meritless? I'll give you the details as much as I can because, like I said, it's 90 pages. At the end of the day, it literally, at the end of the day, it imposes unnecessary and burdensome restrictions concerning new ID requirements. Drop boxes are now, instead of the bill also, it presents as if it's giving you something, but in turn it gives you something and takes something away. So in turn, it gives us all 159 counties now have to have drop boxes, but they are slated to have 1 drop box per 100,000 people. As you can understand mathematically, that's probably going to create a pretty voluminous issue with 1 drop box per 100K people. Number 2, number 5, wherever I'm at, it literally prohibits third parties, including organizations like ours, from collecting absentee ballot applications. And that usually comes into play when we're dealing with senior citizens and those that necessarily can't get to the polls, but have filled out their absentee ballots properly. We can't collect them anymore without exposing ourselves to penalties or sanctions otherwise. There's more. It burdens voters with the risk of meritless disenfranchisement and having to prove things like we saw within the film, The Exact Match. I cannot tell you how many times that my name personally has been wrong, and there are many things that I don't have an exact match on, so this could always be a position that I'm in. It invalidates ballots cast by voters by 5 p.m. in their precincts, or in precincts other than their own, whether they could make it to their proper precincts or not. In turn, it also bans comfort items, and that's also important because we're in 90-degree heat. I went outside today and burst into flames. We can't even hand anybody a bottle of water without risk of criminal penalty. And the last thing I'll say on this, because like I said, it's a heavy answer. it compresses the time period, not only of a runoff, but also of how long you can ask for your absentee ballot. Where you used to have 180 days, you now have 77 days to request your absentee ballot. Where you used to have 9 weeks for a runoff, you have 4. So while it is supposed to increase the integrity and acts of fraud at the polls, you can see that it's obviously a direct response to Black and brown voter turnout. And there's not much that's in that bill that says anything about expanding access to the vote.
Thank you so much for breaking that down for us, and folks that are in Georgia and not in Georgia as well. So you did mention the crimes in terms of folks being able to hand out water or snacks or anything of that nature. Folks, are there any new crimes outside of that are associated with voting in Georgia this year?
I think the provision regarding the handing out of water and food to voters waiting in line is the most egregious example. And I'm not aware myself, or I'm not as familiar with other provisions related to anything that has been criminalized. But I think, does anyone else want to chime in on that one?
I don't know of any additional laws either, David, but I do want to just, echo what you just mentioned about just how egregious this law is. I mean, if we think about the fact that we are in the midst of climate change. So October, September are months where there are lots of storms, lots of very, very bad weather events that happen throughout the Southeast, the Gulf, and Southwest and coastal parts of our state. So each of the last several years, there has been some type of weather event that has been involved with voting. And in addition to that, extreme heat. I can remember in 2016 in Gwinnett County that only had one early voting location, one of the largest counties, fastest growing counties in the state, and it's at the government office. And people wait in line in a parking lot that is entirely asphalt. So you combine record heat, record climate change, record temperatures with the fact that people are waiting in line 6, 8, 9 hours. People were actually passing out from the heat. And so to punish someone for offering water, which at that point in time was necessary to keep someone from falling ill, just shows the extent to which this legislature will go to suppress votes. And again, all of these things that Tanji mentioned that are laid out in SB 202, none of those things apparently mattered before 2020 and 2021, right? Because you didn't have Black and brown people overwhelming the system using vote by mail until a pandemic hit. And oh yes, we are still in a pandemic. It is not ended. There's no cure. It's still here. So these acts that have been predicated upon Georgia voters that are all in support of a lie, because again, there is not one credible case that has been proved for voter fraud in our state, or as far as I know, across the country. And yet, this is what we watched our legislature do in reaction to record turnout, as was mentioned, and record results in our state during an election.
Thank you so much, Wanda, for that context as well. So we can keep it moving. We've got some comments in the comment section, but we're going to get through our questions. So we've got a 3-part question here, folks. What do voters need to do? Okay, to prepare, if they need to vote absentee, if they need to vote early, if they need assistance to vote, or if they plan on voting on election day. How can we be best prepared?
Okay, so I'm going to start us off here. If you need to vote absentee, first thing you want to do is check the SOS site to check your registration status. You just do not want to show up to the polls, because especially now, if we're talking about election day as in tomorrow, or if we're talking about election in November, check your registration status before you leave the house. So you know what you're in for. At that point, as soon as you confirm that you're shown as registered, if you need to vote absentee tomorrow, say you're at a precinct that's not your own, or you get there and you realize that they haven't updated your paperwork for moving, make sure you have your photo ID present. You should absolutely be handed at least a provisional and or absentee ballot and given the option to vote at that time. If you are not allowed to vote, at the end, I'm sure we were all going to share some information about our organizations as to where you can report issues and problems at the polls. Number two, if you want to vote early, understand that because of SB 202, there are now different provisions surrounding the time frame of voting early. So we're now out of early voting in Georgia for tomorrow's election. However, come November, go to the SOS site now. I'll get the dates for you of when early voting starts, because the main thing is you want to keep an eye on that time frame because it is now a tighter window. Also, keep in mind that one of the provisions that changed with SB 202, where we were given a few Saturdays to vote, a lot of Sundays, I know a lot of Black and Brown, usually it's a religious or church activity, they do strolls to the polls. That's not an option greatly around our state now. So you just have to pay attention to the early voting schedule. Number three, if you need assistance to vote, there are a few different ways to get this done, but usually each polling location is supposed to have language assistance where people will need to have different types of physical access to get to the polls. If they do not offer that, I know at least our organization, several organizations offer assistance regarding getting physically to the polls. However, if you need assistance at the polling location, they are supposed to provide a certain level of access there, including language, ramps, a voting machine in which you can sit, etc. And lastly, if you plan on voting on election day in person, again, check your registration status, make sure you have valid ID as listed on the SOS site. And lastly, pack your patience. And I say that only because SB 202 being absolutely new at this point, we have already seen 3 weeks of shenanigans. So I'm not going to say to expect shenanigans tomorrow, but I'm saying do not be surprised if you see one or two things that don't make a lot of sense. So you pack your patience, go as early as you possibly can so you can go ahead and get your vote, because we need every vote to count.
Tangi, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Does anybody else have anything to add to what Tangi has broken down here?
Yeah, I'll just add, everything that Tangi listed is absolutely right. I would say, and tomorrow's election, but so we'll know this for November, is to, it used to be such corny language as organizers and activists, make a plan. But yes, that's basically what Tangi just explained to you, is to make a plan on how it is you're going to vote. But I would also to do that early, because shenanigans, yes, they are real. They often happen in Georgia. I can remember a number of years going to the My Voter Page website a week or before the election, and it's down. It doesn't work. So to make your plan, but make your plan early and have a plan. If vote by mail is not going to be an option because 2-page application that used to be no excuses, but now it has all these provisions, it's confusing. Think about going to do early voting and then checking to make within your county and you're still registered in the same county and you're still on the voter rolls. And if for some reason make early in person work, then your next option would be, so again, checking and making sure your polling precinct hasn't changed. Check the night before and check the day of, because we have heard stories about how precincts have changed, or have gotten an email notification at 9 o'clock the night before. And along the lines of what Tangi mentioned, pack your patience, pack your camp chair, wear your comfortable shoes, bring your own snacks just in case you're at a precinct where shenanigans prevent activists from figuring a way to provide it, but still not jail for offering to someone who's in line to vote 6, 8, 9 hours when we make pictures, because climate change is absolutely real. So, and make it early.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So now that we've voted, and regardless of who's won, we are sitting in line for 6 to 8 hours, and we have cast our ballot. What can Georgia residents do to ensure that their voices are heard by their legislators throughout, regardless of an election year, regardless of who's in office? How can they make their voices heard?
I think it's important to remember that elected officials work for us and not the other way around. But it is important for us to intentionally engage with them and inform them on the issues that matter the most to us.
Thanks, David. And so, what are some ways in which folks can do that? So, I'm an everyday citizen. I'd like to actually get in contact with my representative. What's the best way to go about doing that?
I think it starts with knowing who your elected officials are and to reach out to them, find them, and let them know what matters to you and your community. But I think it's also important for each individual to know their community and to understand the issues and to communicate those issues to their elected officials.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And before we turn it over to the comment section, oh, go ahead, Wanda.
Sorry, no, I was just going to add to what David said. We recognize and understand that not everybody has the ability, council meeting, a school board meeting, a planning and zoning, because, we do still live in a country where there's no livable wage. So meetings, possibly I'm missing an extra shift from work that I could have picked up, or I'm not helping my child with their homework. But, you can also engage with elected officials in other ways, like social media. They have social media accounts. They are there for you to interact. If they block you, our friends at ACLU can have a discussion with them because they're not allowed to do that. There are other ways to interact and work with the people in your community, on your block, to form groups. Take shifts with city council meetings. Something of mine we used to do in the day. If I couldn't make it this week, somebody else would make it. Take a few notes, drop a note in our group chat and just say, hey, this came up for a vote or for a discussion this week. We need to keep an eye on this. So we recognize that not everybody has the ability or the privilege to attend, but there are other ways for us to interact, and accountability. That's the really key part with these elected officials. We can't let folks, get away with campaign promises that they don't actually, come to fruition once they get a seat. And so it is incumbent upon us to hold them accountable.
Nothing but facts, Wanda. Okay, and before we go to the comments section, there are a lot of us that are joining right now that do not actually live in Georgia or may not be able to vote in Georgia for whatever reason. What can folks do to support voter rights and accessibility this year?
Well, so what I offer for those outside of the state of Georgia, I always say, like, we and other organizations run even virtual monitoring programs where we literally give you brief election protection training, so you're not like in class all day. And we literally have you on election day, during early election, et cetera, on 3-hour shifts, helping us monitor what's going on in Georgia. Also, I know that all of our organizations, of course, accept donations. But at the end of the day, we welcome hands and eyes from around the nation, because at the end of the day, Georgia makes history, right? And we watched it happen. And we know that a lot of the things that we're dealing with right now are literally directly in relation to Georgia making history. And unfortunately, that makes a lot of people nervous. So we absolutely, I think we all have avenues that we can engage you all in, who are not in the state of Georgia, where your hands and eyes will be right in the middle of the action, helping us make sure that no stone is unturned in getting access to the ballot.
Perhaps Black Voters Matter, perhaps Galileo. David, Wanda, do you have anything to add there?
No, I don't think I could have put that one.
Great. We are now going to turn it over to the comment section. So our first one up here, I'm going to put it on the screen, comes from Laura. Washington State has mail-in ballots sent to everyone regardless of party. We are contacted if there is a question about our signature. How do we help this happen in Georgia and elsewhere?
I think it's important to elect officials who support expanding voting rights and access in Georgia. It's key, I think.
Yeah, and I think just, in advocacy work, pointing out examples like Washington State, my home grew up, that this has been in place for quite some time, and other places where voting by mail happens or is at least an option, and to also point out that there are no issues there. There's no headline that their elections are wrought with fraud. So there are tangible examples to follow. But David pointed out, we got some changes to be made in the legislature before that can be a reality for us in Georgia.
Thank you so much, folks, for answering that. We've got another question. I'm going to put it on the screen here. It's actually a two-part question from Stephen. One, if Jody Heiss loses to incumbent SOS Brad Raffensperger, do you expect him to claim it was stolen using much of the same words as Abrams? Two, what's your reaction if that happens? Now, folks, before we answer this question, this is a nonpartisan event, so please keep answers bipartisan as much as possible.
That's a tough one.
I don't know how to answer it without
the board's elections. Look, the voter subversion, there have been steps taken to put people in place who are going to fall in line with the party. It is no longer about the will of voters in some of our counties right now. It is a very scary time for us in Georgia, because what is guaranteed to us, the right to vote as citizens of this country, is under grave attack right now. Having these the state board of elections basically strip power from the Secretary of State, and having people put in place in various counties. Georgia has 159 counties, second only to Texas. And so watching county by county have duly appointed representatives for the election board be replaced with basically puppets, people who are going to do the will of a particular party, is very scary. It's very scary. So, it was mentioned earlier, Tangi talks about donations. Yes, we take donations, but also follow us on social media. There are calls to action. There will be times when we will need help from outside the state to provide protections that we need for states like ours, who are in the midst of stripping away my power and my voice as a voter. It's a scary time, but we're going to do everything we can to fight that. But we will need help from outside the state of Georgia on this. So, follow us on social media. Squad up with us.
Thank you. Wonderfully done. Thank you so much. Okay, we've got another question here. I'm going to put it on screen from Vlee7510. How popular is absentee voting, and do you have an excuse to use it? This second part is going to be subjective, so let's answer the first one. How popular is absentee voting in Georgia?
Very, very popular. Before SB 202 and during the 2020 election, absentee voting was very, very popular. Now, after SB 202, it's actually much harder to do so. And it's much harder to request an absentee ballot, period. The SB 202 requires a pen and ink signature to request your absentee ballot, which means you actually need a printer to submit your application. Where before SB 202, you could easily submit your absentee ballot application entirely online without having to download, print, sign, and re-upload the application. So it's actually it's much harder to request an absentee ballot now. But I did recently read some information regarding early voting figures related to absentee voting that I don't have in front of me and I can't quote from off the top of my head. But if I think if any of the other panelists have any information regarding absentee voting turnout, I think it'd be if you could share, it'd be great.
I'll just add, there's a luxury in being able to go and vote on election day. It's not a holiday. It is hard to get the time off, even though you are supposed to have at least a certain time frame to go vote. We know that everybody's job doesn't necessarily follow the rules or regulations. So it's a luxury to actually get to vote on election day. I'm supposed to work tomorrow. So at the end of the day, luckily I work in a place that will allow me to vote, right? So absentee voting is extremely popular because for a lot of people, that's their only choice to get to the polls or to get to the ballot box.
It's interesting because, and the other panelists may not agree, but I don't feel like it was as popular before the pandemic. I think that there has historically been a lot of mistrust between everyday folks and the Secretary of State. I mean, we know the history, closing over 200 polling precincts, purging Black and brown voters, et cetera. So there wasn't necessarily a lot of trust, but the pandemic forced us to use that option because it was safe and there were no, vaccines. When we were organizing and voting in 2020 and again in January 2021, all we had were hand sanitizers and masks. That was it. So it became very popular. I don't remember the exact number. I want to say it was something like maybe 20% fewer absentee ballot requests that we're seeing this year. And that is to be expected because it is confusion. There is confusion. It used to be no excuse. Now it's a 2-page application. David talked about needing a printer. That's also a luxury, right, Tangi? Needing a printer to fill out the application. We've actually, Black Voters Matter, bought printers and placed them strategically all across the probably 20 different counties at some sort of non-traditional places like a barbershop, a beauty salon, a Black-owned restaurant. And we've done a lot of teaching. We've done a lot of spend time educating voters on these new rules so that they can make the best choice for what's best for them. I am fortunate, right, that I do work for an organization where I have time off to go vote tomorrow. But I also live in the city of South Fulton, where election day is a holiday. And so we are able to take the day off, go vote, and still have pay. Because, these are some of the more, progressive, if you will, types of policies that needs to protect what is our most sacred right as citizens. I cannot stress that enough, that voting needs to be easier. It needs to be more accessible for all who are eligible. And we are seeing the exact opposite in our state, sadly, across the country, in particular in the South.
Wow. Thank you both for shedding light on the privilege that many folks take for granted when it comes to the ability to vote. And thank you all for that work that you're doing on the ground. Let's bring up a couple of more questions and then we're going to let folks go. One that is very interesting. I think a lot of people across the country have the same question. I'm going to put it up here. Neil asks, is it illegal to give voters rides to the polls? Great. So we got a lot of no's shaking. Excellent.
But Neil, don't be giving them no ideas now.
Okay. Another kind of similar question we have here. Raphael asks, are food/drink vendors forbidden from selling to voters standing online?
I don't know that it's illegal to sell, but I think to refer to like a local ordinance on food vendors and food trucks, things of that nature. But it does specifically say, and one of the more policy people on the panel can correct me if I'm wrong, there are restrictions in terms of distributing snacks and water. But again, earlier, I'm not going to tip our hands, but we're real smart organizers. We can figure things out. And so, couple that with the resiliency of Georgia voters, we're going to be all right. We'll be all right.
Oh, we are 100% supporting and behind Georgia voters this election season. So we are sending super energy and love to you guys this year. And let's just actually one more question. I'm going to go ahead and pop this up here, and then we're gonna close out for today. Okay, here's Stephen asks. We're told by experts that election subversion is a bigger issue than suppression this year and looking ahead. In you all's opinion, is it?
Yes, I mean, David, I think you did a good job of really kind of starting that conversation earlier. This is about removing appointed officials at the county level, and this is about stripping of power from the Secretary of State, who is the person who oversees elections in our state. So I'm going to let David finish that, because I think he did a great job of explaining it earlier.
I agree. I think voter suppression is just a small part of subverting an election. Absolutely. I think SB 202 grants power to the state legislature that can overturn elections at the county level and can stop the certifying of ballots. So absolutely, I think it is a very grave concern, and that's why we do the work that we do to keep that from happening.
Absolutely. Does anybody have anything else to add there?
No, I agree. I just think that it introduces partisanship where it just shouldn't be. The act of voting it's just not a partisan activity. All parties should actually be encouraging more access to voting. So I agree.
Agreed. 100%. Folks, we are really appreciative of your time here to supplement this film with a great discussion on where we are with Georgia right now. The film focuses on Georgia. It uses that as a case study. And it's just great to hear, folks, before your election day, your primaries are tomorrow. We wish you the best. And folks, one of the best things that you can do is share the word about voter suppression. And this film is available to everyone. All you have to do is go to www.fighttovote.org. Thank you all so much for joining us this time. We've got Arizona up next, and we'll have Florida. I mean, we had Florida before. We have Arizona up next, and we'll have Texas. So Georgia, sending you all excellent, positive energy for tomorrow and also the midterms. Thank you all so much for joining us, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.